Merry meets my fellow bookish witches. Welcome to Witchy Reads, a place where we talk about books and other bookish things. Watching a horrible adaptation of a beloved book is a universal experience for those of us in the bookish community. We watch in frustration, sadness, or horror as our favorite stories are taken and twisted into something unrecognizable. This isn't what I envisioned in my head. How could they do this? This could have been so much better. This one doesn't count. Hopefully, they'll give it another shot in a couple of years. Hear me out. Maybe next time they will get it right. I have made a new Hear Me Out cake. I think it's really pretty. All right, here comes the first one. Get it right on the cake there. All right, beautiful. Eragon by Christopher Paolini is the first book of the Inheritance Cycle series that was published back in 2002. Then, in 2006, we got what is arguably one of the worst book-to-movie adaptations ever.
Miles away, a young boy ventures out hunting. His life and Alocasia will never be the same again.
It is hard for me to describe just how horrible this film is. It is unwatchable in every way. I would put it on par with Shyamalan's Avatar: The Last Airbender film. At least I was able to sit all the way through this one. Despite having one of the easiest hero journey stories put to paper with dragons, despite having an arguably stacked cast, and despite having a bit of a built-in fan base, as well as coming off the momentum of the Boy Wizard series, this movie flopped so bad, and I was so disappointed. I unironically love this book. I'm saying with my full chest in present tense. Though I haven't read this book since I was in high school, so I'm basing this purely on my memory of the thing at this point. At the time, I did reread it more than once. So there's that. I saw this film in theaters with my best friend, and we ended up trauma bonding with another group of people. We went across the street from the theater to a Denny's and complained about how bad this movie was with this group of strangers for hours.
So much trauma.
Of course they didn't continue adapting the series. Obviously. Just thinking about how those movies would have turned out gives me the heebie-jeebies. They would not have been good. However, almost 20 years later, I am here saying, I want them to try again. I think the book series had so much potential, and I think we are due for another fun fantasy romp. I don't think this is going to hit peak Lord of the Rings status, but I fully believe it could produce something better than the Hobbit films.
Blimey! But what's come out of me oota?
This might be a hill I'm willing to die on. What would I want out of a second chance adaptation? Firstly, I want it to be a television series. I've mentioned this before, and I think more book adaptations would be served better as TV shows, especially if you have so much content, which this 4-book series obviously has. I think it also allows for certain things that are better represented in a visual medium to be fleshed out and improved upon for the storytelling. Funnily enough, an announcement for a brand new Eragon TV series on Disney Plus came and went in July of 2022. When I first heard about it, I thought, yes, I am on board. I am willing to give this a chance. I think it's easy to feel and think that way when the original adaptation was so horrible. I was excited and couldn't wait to see what the updates for the show would bring. Then, silence. For over 2 years, there were no updates and what appeared to be limited to no movement on the project. That is until February of 2025, when Paolini himself stated that the project is still moving forward. It's just that negotiations have been slow. Not sure if this means we are actually going to get our second chance adaptation of Eragon, but I hope Disney sees it through. I would love to see this story get fleshed out as a TV series and get an actual decent adaptation. Here's hoping. Next. Yep, there it is. Can't wait to hear the arguments about this one. The Giver is a young adult dystopian literary classic by Lois Lowry, published in 1993. If this wasn't a required reading for you in middle or high school, then you are likely a rarity. This is actually one of the few required readings that I had from school that I read multiple times outside of academics. So that should tell you that this book is good, or at the very least, I really liked it and got something out of reading it. Even as a kid, I always thought a film adaptation of this book would have been so interesting to see because the story has a visual element that should theoretically play super well on the screen. Then the 2014 film adaptation happened, and
when people have the freedom to choose, they choose wrong every single time.
I wouldn't say this is the worst adaptation because there are clearly far worse out there, but it was one of the most disappointing adaptations for me. It felt like I was waiting forever for this specific adaptation to exist. I think the big visual element that I was hoping would look fantastic on the screen ended up being so mediocre.
Right.
You'll see them all in time, all colors, all differences.
They downplayed this huge narrative element within the book, which should have had an amazing visual impact. But the adaptation treats it like it isn't a big deal. Bad idea. Huge misstep, along with other cinematic and casting choices. What would I want out of a second chance adaptation? This is one of the rare occasions where I'm going to say this doesn't need to be made into a TV series. The only way I would agree to that decision for an adaptation is if they plan on expanding the world and the politics behind the government running this society. The original film adaptation tried to do something like that and failed miserably. In a TV series, that might be something cool to explore, but I still think that would be a risk and I would need it to be pretty close to perfect to be okay with that. So no, I would keep the choice to adapt it to a film, and instead of focusing on the YA tropes, I would lean more into the darkly dystopian nature of the book. Yes, the book is through the eyes of a kid who is essentially being parentified by his entire society, but there are some heavy, dark themes in this book that I think would be worth exploring further in the adaptation. The original adaptation added so much unnecessary fluff, primarily dealing with a love story that just was non-existent in the book, and I think that stuff should be replaced with more of the dark, dystopian political stuff. I also think the ending would need to be reworked because the ambiguity of the book ending is part of the reason that makes it so compelling. And the original adaptation really dropped the ball with that. I know it could be done better and it should be done better. However, since the first adaptation took so long and it did not do well, the likelihood that they will try to adapt this again is a long shot. But if they decide to do another adaptation of this, I am open and willing to see what could be done with better writing and direction. All right, here's the next one. Are we shocked? Are you surprised? You really shouldn't be. You are crazy if you thought this list wouldn't include the infamous sensation that was the 2008 adaptation of Twilight by Stephenie Meyer. These books came at a particular point in my life where they were just what I needed. Yes, I liked them. Yes, I enjoyed the film adaptations to an extent.
Beautiful. This is the skin of a killer, Bella. You better hold on tight, spider monkey.
They are iconic in every sense of the word. Campy as fuck. Quotable to hell, and propelled our sapphic queen and one of Hollywood's beloved weirdos into stardom. That all being said, the adaptations are not great, save for that one scene that sent everyone into orbit. If you know, you know. I think this series is ripe for another bite at an adaptation. If we had to suffer through 3 stupidly bad spin-off films, plus a second remake of the Boy Wizard series, surely we can give Twilight a second chance here. I think it's safe to say that vampire media is back with a vengeance, so why not take advantage? Especially since the vampire media now seems to be leaning more into the darker elements. Wouldn't that be a fun filter to add to this story? What would I want out of a Twilight series second chance adaptation? Again, this would absolutely need to be a television series. This way, so many narrative and character elements that needed to be expanded upon could be. I think it would be fun to actually see some background stories on all the vampire characters. Though maybe not Jasper. In fact, I'm team let's have Jasper not be a Confederate soldier. Give him a new background story. Seriously, the Confederate vampire trope needs to die. The only time I found that trope interesting was in Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. There was a legitimate narrative point to it. I would also love to have more care done surrounding the Native American lore about the werewolves. If this so happens to change some things regarding the werewolves, I'd be okay with that. I think it would be super cool to add some actual lore and history to the story, which, if I'm being honest, is something the books were clearly missing. This is a series that could have so much potential as a TV adaptation. The only thing I could see fans getting a little butthurt over is their love of the original cast. But my solution? Have them come on for cameos, or give them different roles. I think that would be fun and would draw in the fan base more easily. I did recently find out that an animated series adaptation of Midnight Sun, which is just Twilight through the point of view of Edward, is in development at Netflix. That could definitely have some potential, and I think I am likely to check it out once it's released. I do still think a full second chance adaptation should still happen though. Yep. Again, this might be controversial, but this is my hear me out cake. It's me. Okay, this is for me. This is what I want. If you were to ask me to pinpoint when the mainstream love of YA dystopian novels began to die, I would point directly to the Divergent series by Veronica Roth. That's not to say I didn't have a good time reading these books, because I did. Well, at least the first 2. They weren't bad. Pretty standard YA fare that was clearly banking off the common tropes of the time. Separating teens based on innocuous personality traits, a female chosen one who's not like other girls, and a corrupt government that can only be stopped by children. The 2014 film adaptation was trying to squeeze just under the wire of the popularity of the genre, and managed to do so for the first 2 adaptations. Much like how I felt about the Eragon adaptation, these films are just so bad. I think the story was poorly executed. I think the setting looks cheap and not believable at all. I'm not sure how much of a hot take this is, but I do not think any of the casting was good. Save for maybe Miles Teller, who plays the most I want to punch this dude in the face character in the book to ridiculous perfection.
Is it something I said?
These adaptations were just a cash grab. As a semi-fan of the books, I am well aware of that. especially since they tried and failed to capitalize on the worst trend to ever infect Hollywood, splitting the final movie into 2 films. If you aren't a fan of these books or films, you might be thinking, but Witchy, there are 3 books and 3 films, so they didn't split the last one. But oh no. See, they did actually split the last movie, and because interest for the series plummeted, they just axed the final installment. So these adaptations are out there with no conclusion, no closure. The funny thing is, the fans don't seem to be that mad about it because the adaptations were not good. How would I make the second chance adaptation of the Divergent series better? Obviously, it would need to be made into a TV series. I would want to see more setup and build up as far as the politics of the world. I don't necessarily need to see the overseeing government that is operating outside the city limits. That's mostly in the 3rd book and was literally the worst part of the story. What I do want to see more of is how the factions function and interact prior to the events of the book. I feel like we got none of that in the book or the original adaptation. This series really wanted you to suspend your disbelief with a lot of the government and political stuff, which is a shame because I would say that left out so many opportunities to make the story more compelling. I would also want more individually fleshed out backstories on certain characters. Triss's parents, the leaders of each faction. I would even love to get a point of view of her brother that shows how he was slowly corrupted by his faction. Basically, more political drama, less YA teen angsty love story that happens to be in a dystopian setting.
Oh, okay, guys, come on, let's go, seriously. We can do that later.
I would also need the casting to be way better this time around. I'm not saying the original cast wasn't talented. I just think these were not the right roles for these actors. Ideally, it would be a cast with relative unknowns. But I know that's a hard ask in Hollywood today. This is what I would want. Last thing, I would be 1,000% on board with them reworking, rewriting the storyline from the 3rd book. The 3rd book was so bad in what was already pretty much a mediocre series. I don't even think fans would be upset if they changed the story, and in fact would welcome it much like I would. Work with Veronica Roth. Get some awesome writers who know what they are doing to pull the story in a better direction that makes more narrative sense. Because that's the thing with the 3rd and final book in the series. It makes no goddamn sense. So just change it. I am down to see what could become of it if it's done well. I don't know if you're ready for this last one. I am having some hot takes today with this Hear Me Out cake. The hottest of takes. Many people might not remember that in the middle of the Twilight craze, Stephenie Meyer wrote an adult sci-fi novel called The Host that was then adapted into a bland film in 2013.
Stop that! Stop!
But I remember, yes, another Stephenie Meyer adaptation makes the list. But unlike her more popular Twilight series, The Host never got any critical acclaim or recognition, despite it being, in my opinion, a more interesting story.
We've been invaded by an alien race.
This was also another cash grab adaptation, with the hope being to cling to what remained of the Twilight fandom once those film adaptations ended. I do not think this was a smart move, primarily because I don't think there was that big of an overlap of Twilight fans who also read/liked The Host. They are technically in different age demographics and in wildly different genres. The only reason I ended up picking up and reading The Host is because I was interested in reading Meyer's other books. I did fall more in the age demographic for this one, and I liked the sci-fi element, which is a genre I don't dive into as much. I was pleasantly surprised that I enjoyed this book as much as I did. Dare I say, even more than Twilight. I won't lie though, there are some problematic things in this book. The major one being the age gap between the love interest, which is harder to ignore when we aren't dealing with a 115-plus-year-old vampire, but two mortal humans. Not to mention an alien with an undisclosed age who body snatches two different teenage girl bodies. I would say this has a lot to do with the Mormon influence in Meyer's writing that I think is honestly one of her biggest quirks that is a hindrance to her stories. I'm not going to defend that aspect of the book, and in fact, I think the book should have been called out on that considering this is meant to be an adult novel and was marketed as such. What I did like about the book was the story itself. I liked the idea of an alien species that is unaware that they are almost parasitic in nature, coming into Earth and taking over the bodies of humans simply because they think they can do it better. I think this is honestly the other highly probable scenario next to them just coming and blasting us into smithereens. This adaptation. What can I say? It is really bland. Not just bad, but boring. Which is honestly a bummer, because I think the book has more action and tense scenes that seem to have just been dropped by the adaptation. Or if those scenes were included, they weren't done well. I also think this is another adaptation that just didn't have the right cast. I love Saoirse Ronan. I think she is immensely talented. I do not think she was the right casting choice for Wanderer or Wanda. Additionally, the two love interests, no offense to them, but the decision to have two Wonder Bread looking actors that I couldn't tell apart was not the way to go. The question is then, what would I want out of a second chance adaptation of The Host? Say it with me. This should be adapted into a television series. I think there is enough context with the aliens invading, the science behind the body snatching, and the world within the aliens living as humans. There is so much that can be expanded upon and would be interesting to see, and I want to see it. I need it expanded into a television series. All of that. Outside of that, the biggest change I would do is aging up the characters. Primarily the women characters. This is based on an adult novel, so the characters should be adults. Period. Melanie should be at minimum in her 20s. This shouldn't be a hot take. And the human that Wanda takes over at the end needs to be in her 20s as well. That part of the story is even worse when you think about the implications of Wanda's love interest seeking out a human for her and intentionally choosing a minor. So I'm gonna really need that to be changed in this new adaptation. The fun thing about the book is that it has an open ending that was left with the potential for the story to continue beyond what we saw. This is another solid reason why I think another adaptation is warranted, and a TV series would be a great way to expand within the story's universe. It could also easily turn into a story about taking Earth back or learning to live with the aliens as humans. The limit is really only the writer's imagination. So much more could be done with this story, and I think a second chance at a decent adaptation could be a fun, interesting way to go about it. There it is, the final hear me out cake. I know that for a lot of adaptations, you only get one chance to make the first impression, one opportunity to prove you are a commodity that is worth having an adaptation. So if a book happens to have an adaptation that flopped, the chances of getting a second chance are very low, but not impossible. Do I think the adaptations I picked have a shot of getting that second chance? Well, some of them already are technically, and I'm excited to see what those second chances will look like. For the others, I think it's less likely to happen, but I never say never. The fact is, adaptations are getting better. So of course, for the adaptations that flopped but we hoped would be better, we want to see them get that gold standard treatment that a lot of adaptations get nowadays. So why not? If you enjoy my videos and would like to support my channel, the best way to do that right now is to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and leave a little comment to let me know that you were here. Let's see, how about this time, if you made it this far, let's leave like a little film emoji, or hey, better yet, Let me know what adaptation you think deserves a second chance, because I know that you've got to have one, at least one. I have 5. It really is a big help, and I greatly appreciate it. Until our next chapter together, merry part and blessed be.